The antidote to tyranny is knowledge, and acting with courage to defend our most basic rights, life, liberty, and property, dedicated to the cause of freedom for everyone. Here's Peter Mack.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in here to Liberty News Radio. This is the Peter Mack Show. We're glad you're with us this evening, December 12th, 2009. My special guest tonight is Professor Walter Block. He is the Harold E. Wirth Eminent Scholar Endowed Chair and Professor of Economics at Loyola University in New Orleans. And I got a hold of something he recorded some time ago, a series on called Defending the Undefendable. And Dr. Block, if you're there, maybe you can just give us a brief overview, and then we can jump into discussing some of these recordings that you did called Defending the Undefendable.
Yes, I'm here, and thanks for having me on your show. I'm delighted to be with you. Defending the Undefendable is a book I wrote quite a while ago, and the essence of it is, I think, to promote libertarianism or to explain what libertarianism is, and it's to take counterexamples to libertarianism. People who are cordially reviled and hated, and yet they do nothing incompatible with libertarianism, so I try to defend them. For example, the pimp, the prostitute, the curmudgeon, slumlord, gypsy cab driver, libeler, blackmailer, people who are seen as very bad, but who are really not violating the libertarian axiom, and the libertarian axiom is do not initiate violence against people or their property. And as long as you don't do that, you're okay in my book, in my libertarian book. So the book is dedicated to defending these.
Okay, so is the recording your voice, or is that somebody else? It sounds like it's probably somebody else that read excerpts from that.
Well, there is Jeff Riggenbach, who's got a beautiful, melodious, deep voice, who has read the entire book. So if you are traveling somewhere and you want to stick it into your CD drive or whatever, you can listen to the book. I didn't read that.
Okay. Defending the Undefendable, and where they can get that, I suppose, at Amazon.com and other places like that?
Yes. Lou Rockwell at the Mises Institute also sells it, Amazon.com. It's available pretty much anywhere.
Right. Lou, I'm sure that's where I got it now. Well, you mentioned the fundamental principle of libertarianism, which is to, not initiate aggression against anybody that's done no harm, and I totally agree with that. That's the essence, the theme of this show. And tell me if it's not your experience, Dr. Block, that when we say to people, do you believe in this principle, most people, it seems to me, say, oh yeah, I think I would never initiate any harm against somebody that's done no harm to me or anybody else. But then when you ask them about certain things like, prostitution and, somebody that takes drugs or even a drug pusher, they think such activity should be outlawed and such people should be punished. So there's apparently a disconnect in their minds between at least what they say they agree to and the implications of that statement. Is that your experience too? Or not?
It pretty much is, although I don't usually characterize libertarianism in terms of harm, because you can harm people in all sorts of legitimate ways. I usually speak in terms of rights violations or initiation of violence against people as a rights violation. For example, you have a bakery and I open up a bakery across the street and I take half your customers. In a sense, I've harmed you, but I have a right to open up a bakery. So the key is not harming people. The key is violating rights. And the only way, I think, for a libertarian you can violate rights is to initiate force against their person or their property. And you're quite right. Most people say, yeah, of course, I would never do such a despicable, dastardly thing as initiate violence against someone like a rapist. That's horrible. But somehow, when the subject of democracy comes up, all bets are off. People just sort of lose their senses. They think, well, if a majority says so, then it's okay. Like, for example, suppose we vote as a society to ban heroin. Well, most people would say, yeah, I support that. The majority voted for it. Right. There are two problems with that. One, Hitler came to power through a democracy. Just because a majority of people vote for something doesn't make it right. there is such a thing, after all, as the tyranny of the majority.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Absolutely.
So they somehow forget all about that, and they say, well, if a majority votes for it, then it must be legitimate in some way. And then, like most people will vote to prohibit heroin and marijuana and cocaine and things like that. After all, these things are illegal in the U.S. at least. Portugal has just legalized all these things about a year ago, and it's an interesting case in point.
Right. And, if you can speak up a little bit, you're on the phone, so sometimes we don't get quite as good of audio connection there, Dr. Block. That will help a little bit.
Okay, I'll try.
That's good. To lead into our discussion here with a little more crass example, some people would invoke a sort of utilitarian principle, and they would say, well, if the greater good is done by some action, then even if somebody is harmed in some minor way, then that's okay. We want to maximize the good. And then I would respond to that and say, well, then is gang rape okay? If 10 men sit around and they say, I want to rape this woman, and we could somehow, and I don't know how you would do that in some mathematical sense, but we could calculate the good or the pleasure that these terrible men would have in raping this woman. If their pleasure outweighs the woman's pain, then from a utilitarian perspective, it seems to me that would be a justifiable action, which is pretty close.
I think that's a brilliant refutation of utilitarianism. That if 10 people really enjoy harming one person, such that the utility that they gain is greater than the disutility she loses, well, then this is justified according to utilitarianism. I think that's a brilliant refutation on your part.
Well, I didn't think of it. I read it somewhere, I'm sure. I'd love to take credit for it. But I think that's closely aligned with the notion of democracy, because people somehow think if the majority of people want it, then somehow that good outweighs any harm that would accrue to the minority in the group, without ever thinking about this concept of rights and obviously, as you mentioned, the notion of the tyranny of the majority, which is, I think, rampant in this country.
Oh yeah, in pretty much every country, not just the U.S. Most countries.
Right. Right. But we're supposed to be the shining beacon on the hill. We're supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. And it just, the more you look at it, the more it seems to me that we're not. I mean, we may be freer than most other countries in most ways, and that's good. But, of late here, I think we're losing them. But I don't want to get off onto that too much. Let's talk, if we could, then, about some of these episodes, like the prostitute. Why, in your view, is prostitution okay in society? I mean, clearly, well, go ahead. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, I don't really think it's okay. I sort of oppose it myself. Okay. I have a daughter. I wouldn't want her to be a prostitute, God forbid. I think the best way for people to interact sexually is based on love, or at least friendship and things like that, and not money.
Right.
But the question is not so much is it good or is it okay. The question is, should we put people in jail for doing it? And for the libertarian, the only time you put people in jail is if they initiate violence against someone. Now, if a prostitute forces someone into sex, well, then yes, you put her into jail, but not because she's a prostitute, but because she's a rapist.
Right.
So I think that while you have to distinguish between favoring the thing and favoring the legalization of it. For example, I also oppose heroin, the use of heroin. I think it's a very bad thing to do, but I favor the legalization of it, and the same thing with prostitution. I don't think people should be put in jail for consenting acts between adults. I mean, here you have two adults, a woman selling sexual services to a man and for an agreed-upon price, and they go and engage in sexual intercourse, and he pays her $100 or whatever it is. And where is the rights violation here? I don't see it. And thus, I think that it should be legalized. And happily, it is legalized in Nevada, except for Las Vegas. Prostitution is legal there, and it has good utilitarian characteristics. For example, when it's not underground, the women can be inspected for health purposes, and You don't have any fly-by-night operations where there's theft or anything, and you have brand name capital. So the system works much better than when it's prohibited in underground and in most cities. There are killings of prostitutes and theft of customers and all sorts of horrible things.
Right. Well, we're up against the break here, but Dr. Block, when we come back, let's venture on into a discussion about pimps and why they should also not be outlawed.
Okay.
Stay with us, folks. You're listening to Liberty News Radio. We'll be back here on the Peter Mack Show in a couple minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. We're glad you're with us tonight, and Dr. Block is with us talking about defending the undefendable and examining several features of society, several areas where certain activities are outlawed. And what we're discussing tonight is, should those be outlawed? If you invoke the libertarian principle that unless you're violating somebody's rights, and you correctly corrected me, Dr. Block, it's not simply harm, because harm can accrue to people in a number of ways, but it's more of a physical harm where you're actually violating somebody's rights that should be outlawed. And going back to, you were talking about prostitution before the break, and before we go on to the discussion about pimps, I would just get your opinion, too, on the notion that given that prostitution is illegal, what I've seen in my city here in Kansas City at times is they round up these prospective clients of prostitutes. I guess they're called Johns or something. And they will show their names and sometimes their faces on TV or in the paper. And this is before this person has ever been found guilty of such a crime. And I find that especially egregious. And, of course, if prostitution were legalized, all that would go away. Do you see that as a problem, too? Or?
Oh, yes, certainly. To embarrass and humiliate people before they've been found guilty of a crime is horrendous. But it's bad even if they had been found guilty. Let's suppose that they really were pursuing prostitutes with the idea of paying them for sex. It's illegal, but it shouldn't be illegal. In the free society, it wouldn't be illegal. So even though it's consistent with law to embarrass and humiliate them after they've been found guilty, not before, still it shouldn't be done because it's a victimless crime. There is no victim. Right.
Now, some would say that, and I agree with you, prostitution is certainly a deplorable way to live one's life from, what I've read and everything. Some would say that prostitutes are in fact victims of a pimp. I don't know how women, maybe growing up in poverty or whatever, they are encouraged and they find themselves because of a drug habit or whatever, they find themselves attracted to and encouraged to become a prostitute. And a pimp is somebody who's by definition making money. He is providing or advertising their services to people, and he gets a cut, I guess in some cases a pretty hefty cut, of what the prostitute makes. Now, a lot of people would find that despicable. Why do you say that shouldn't be outlawed?
Because it's not per se and necessarily despicable. If the prostitute agrees to give the pimp a cut in return for him protecting her and getting her more customers or whatever it is, then it's just like an agent. It's as if a movie actress has an agent who gets her movie roles. There's nothing wrong with it. The wrongness of the pimp is when he uses force to subjugate the woman, but that's not necessarily a concomitant of pimping. In Nevada, where prostitution is legal, there are pimps or madams, which is the same thing, where namely the House of Prostitution advertises its ladies of the night and brings more customers there, and they get a cut of it, but it's voluntary. The girls or the women who are working as prostitutes have agreed to be there. They're not being shanghaied or forced into it. So yes, if they're forced into it, then that's horrible and should be illegal, and people who do that should be pursued to the fullest extent of the law, and we should be very serious about that. But it's not necessarily the case as the point in Nevada and also in Europe. There are many places in Europe where madams and pimps work with prostitutes on a voluntary basis, and that's okay.
Right. Well, we probably won't have time to go through all these, so I'll just jump through them as I sort of see fit, if that's okay. Let's jump down to the drug pusher and the drug addict. I guess that's sort of the relationship between the, well, I don't know. You tell me. The drug addict, of course, is simply someone who's using drugs, and obviously to me, and I think there should be to somebody else, that person is violating nobody's rights. It's, in most cases, a person's doing something destructive to his body, but you know, in the case of marijuana, I mean, I'm not sure that's any more destructive than the consumption of alcohol, and that's a legal drug. What about the drug pusher, though? A lot of people, I think, would throw the drug pusher maybe in the same category as a pimp, as somebody who's making money off of the misfortune of somebody who happens to be in that, you know, activity of consuming drugs.
Well, every seller makes money off the misfortune of the buyer. If I'm in the business of selling shoes and I sell you a pair of shoes, I'm making money off of your shoelessness or lack of as many shoes as you want.
Right.
You know, so there's nothing wrong with making money off of people's misery, because in the capitalist system, the way you make money off of people's misery is by alleviating their misery. In other words, if I sell you a pair of shoes from my shoe store, you're benefiting from it, and I'm making money off of you, so there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Now, I should mention that all this has to do, I did use the phrase consenting adults. Kids are a very different thing. If you're pushing drugs to kids, then that's one of the lowest rungs of hell as far as I'm concerned. Legally, you know, you should be pursued to the ends of the earth. We're talking just adults.
Right.
So, you know, people push aspirin on you by advertising aspirin. Nothing wrong with that. Nowadays, alcohol is legal, but there was a time when people would push alcohol on you and they go to jail for it because it was illegal.
Right.
And happily, we've come to our senses and legalized it. And I think you're right that marijuana is probably less harmful than tobacco, although I'm not sure of that. I'm no chemist. I'm no pharmacist, but I think so. Or at least it's a horse race, and you know, why we should prohibit the one and legalize the other is a bit beyond me. I think we should legalize all things for consenting adults.
Right. Right. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that would be my view on that, that the drug pusher and the drug addict should be legal. Look, if we legalized marijuana and, you know, they sold it in drugstores and they advertised it, not near schools, okay, but, you know, if they advertised it, well, then you'd have a drug pusher and it would be fine. You know, now there's these cases where people have chemotherapy and the only thing that can reduce their pain is marijuana, and the government won't allow them to do it. It seems very cruel. You know, you talk about the U.S. as being the land of the free. Well, that doesn't seem that free to me. Right.
Well, exactly, and I've often thought in the whole realm of medicine how outrageous it is for, you know, some government official in particular, but, you know, in a general sense, anybody, to tell me I can't go to a physician and have that physician, you know, I as an adult, have that physician provide some treatment for me, no matter how risky that treatment may be, no matter how unorthodox or whatever. If I think that treatment's appropriate and he's willing to provide it, why can't he do that? But obviously they can't do that in America. And who knows what kinds of treatments people are missing out of because they're not, quote unquote, approved. Or obviously, you know, the FDA regulates drugs highly, and many drugs take years and years and millions of dollars to get approved by the FDA. And, you know, we could do a whole show probably on that. But
oh, yeah. Well, the FDA is a heinous, despicable organization. There are people in the last legs or the last throes of cancer, and they want to try unapproved medicines that are experimental, and the FDA will not allow it because their criterion is it has to be proven to be beneficial, and these experimental drugs are not proven yet to be beneficial. And here's a guy who's got, you know, a month to live, and he wants to try it, and they won't let him. I mean, isn't that pretty despicable?
It is.
Disgusting. And, you know, Ron Paul is trying to get rid of the Fed. I wish he'd try to get rid of the FDA also. Well, I'm sure he is as well. But
I don't think that, given the economic situation, I don't think the FDA is as large of target on the radar screen as the Fed is right now. But maybe at some point. Let's move on down. let's move to the blackmailer. As I understand it, if I acquire some information on you, some very negative information on you, by whatever means, and I go to you and I say, look, Dr. Block, well, we're at the bottom of the hour, so I can't reveal my despicable information yet, but we'll do that when we come back.
Okay.
Hang with us, folks. We'll be back with Dr. Block discussing Defending the Undefendable on the Peter Mack Show. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the Peter Mack Show with my special guest, Dr. Walter Block. He's a professor of economics at Loyola University in New Orleans, and we're discussing various parts of his book, Defending the Undefendable. Just prior to the break, Dr. Block, I was about to propose a scenario to you. Let's suppose, I just thought of this up on the break, let's suppose that you're secretly a closet Marxist.
What?
And,
no way.
And somehow I find that out. I don't know how I find that out because I've never met you, but somehow I find that out that you're a closet Marxist, and I'm going to go public with that, and that's going to make you look like a hypocrite and a fool and might damage your career as a professor of economics down there. And I come to you and I say, look, Dr. Block, if you don't pay me $10,000, I'm going to reveal this information publicly. That would be considered blackmail by most people, right?
Oh, that is blackmail, yes.
Okay. Now, why is that not violating your rights?
Well, it's not violating my rights because you didn't threaten to use physical force on me. You didn't pull a gun on me and say, if you don't give me $10,000, I'll shoot you. That would be extortion. You didn't say, if you don't give me $10,000, I'm going to burn down your house. Namely, the threat there would be to do something that is illicit. But what are you threatening? Right. What you are threatening is to use your God-given or constitutional-given rights of free speech to tell the truth about me. You're going to say Block is a commie or a Marxist or whatever. It's true, right? We're stipulating
right.
that I am a secret.
In the hypothetical, sure.
In the hypothetical. And all you're doing is threatening me to be a gossip. Well, do you have a right to be a gossip? Should we put you in jail for gossiping? Suppose you didn't
right.
come to me and say, give me $10,000 or I'll gossip. You just blabbed. You just started telling, hey, Block is a commie, Block is a Marxist, don't invite him to free enterprise lectures or anything like that. You're a gossip. Do we put gossips in jail? Should we put gossips in jail? Of course not. So,
right.
all you're threatening me with is to become a gossip. Well, if you have a right to be a gossip, you have a right to threaten to be a gossip.
There you go.
So
now this is closely. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say this is closely related to the idea of slander or libel too. What is the difference, and why is slander and libel also theoretically should be allowed?
Right. Should be legal. Again,
legal.
I think these aren't good things, just like prostitution and drugs. I don't think it's good to blackmail people, but the question
right.
is, should it be legal? Slander is speech, libel is written words, and now what you're going to do is, you're not asking me to pay you to refrain, you're just libeling me. Let's suppose I'm not a Marxist now, and you say I am a Marxist, and you write papers,
right.
and you broadcast on your radio show, block the commie, block the Marxist, whatever.
Right.
The argument is what you've done is stolen something from me, namely my reputation. And
right.
just as if you were to steal my coat, that would be a violation of my rights as a libertarian. So goes the argument, which I disagree with, that if you steal my reputation, you've taken something from me. Goodwill, I could sell a factory that's worth $1 million. I could sell it for $10 million because $9 million is goodwill. And
right.
People work hard to gain good reputations, to gain goodwill, and now you've besmirched it. You've blasted it all over the radio land that I'm a Marxist. Okay, so that's the argument in favor of considering libel or slander to be a crime. The argument against it is, have you really taken something that I own, like my coat? what does my reputation consist of? Well, my reputation consists of not what I think of me, but what everyone else thinks about me. Namely, my reputation consists of other thoughts, other people's thoughts. So paradoxically, I can't own my reputation any more than I own my tailor or my baker or my employer or my wife or anything like that. Just because the first-person possessive pronoun is being used doesn't mean that it's ownership. So, yes, it's my reputation in the sense that it applies to me and I can benefit from it. I can get higher speaking honoraria for if I have a good reputation than if I don't. But still, I don't own my reputation. It consists of the thoughts of other people, and therefore, you haven't stolen anything from me. So that argument that I first laid out is invalid. Now, paradoxically, reputations would be safer if we didn't have libel laws. Because right now, you know, if you say I'm a Marxist, people are going to say, well, with the smoke there's a fire. Maybe I'm not really a Marxist. Maybe I'm just a pinko or something. But if there were no libel and we had true free speech, you know, right now the newspapers have help-wanted ads and personals ads and cars for sale and houses for sale and things like that. Well, they might have libel sections. You know, Joe is a commie, Pete is a Marxist, I don't know, somebody takes a bath with a rubber ducky, and, you know, all sorts of allegations. And then the mere allegation would no longer be sufficient to ruin a reputation. Now you'd have to prove it. People would say, well, you say I'm Walter Block is a commie, but, you know, where's the evidence? Whereas right now, if you start blasting it out, people are going to say, hey, you know, maybe it's true. So I think that paradoxically, reputations would be safer if we had a truly free society of free speech.
Right. And it strikes me, it does seem somewhat inconsistent to have laws against libel and slander. Political figures, politicians, and, you know, are, at least in practice, it seems to me, Dr. Block, more quote-unquote fair game than other people. I can say my congressman is a liar, or he's a leftist, or he's a commie, or whatever, and nobody ever. I mean, that's considered in our society okay, even if it's not true. If I say that about somebody else, there's a little more danger, perhaps, it seems to me, of uttering something that's false or just, you know, just my opinion. If it's somebody who's not in an elected office. Is that your sense? No,
you're quite right. I think the law is that if you're a public figure, then it's very hard to prove libel or damages or anything. So I guess I am a sort of a quasi-public figure. I'm not really a top public figure. On the other hand, I'm not just, you know, some average guy. I do appear on radio and TV and all, so I might be in the gray area. But if you just said that your next-door neighbor is a pinko or something, he could sue you. Whereas if you said that your congressman was, he couldn't, because he's a public figure. But why should rights be different based on whether you're a public figure? Like, say you're a movie actor and you're very famous. Why should you have fewer rights? That doesn't seem very just.
Right, indeed. Let's move on to one of my favorite among these 32 episodes that appear in the recorded version of Defending the Undefendable, and that's the counterfeiter. And you have in parentheses the non-government counterfeiter. And I'm just going to let you explain, if you would, for our audience, sort of lay out the basis, if you would, of what the government's actually doing with these Federal Reserve notes, and then maybe define counterfeiting, and then we can discuss what a non-government counterfeiter is and why that would be helpful to society, if I understand you right.
Yes. Okay. Well, let me, since I'm a professor, I can never answer a direct question. I have to go in a roundabout way. And the roundabout way that I'll proceed is, why do we have money in the first place? And what is money? Before we can figure out what counterfeiting money is, we have to be clear on just what money is. Now, everybody, you know, says, don't be stupid. They open their wallet and they pull out a $10 bill and they say that's money. But let's get more basic than that. The reason the reason that barter is a pain in the neck, and the reason that barter, trading one good for another, is difficult is because of a thing called the double coincidence of wants. Suppose I have shoes and I want a yo-yo. Well, now I have to find a guy with a yo-yo who wants shoes.
Right.
You know how difficult that would be. I mean, it'd be very difficult. So what I do is instead of directly making a direct trade for shoes for a yo-yo, which requires this double coincidence, I turn in my shoes for something that I think most people will like, say salt or apples or something, and then I go and try to get a yo-yo based on salt or apples, which I think most people will want. Namely, I'm making two trades, which you think would be a little more difficult, but I can get that yo-yo that I want a lot easier if I go this indirect route.
Right.
Because it'd be very hard to find a guy with a yo-yo who wants my particular shoes. Okay, so now we have these commodities, salt or apples or whatever it is, fish hooks, cigarettes have been used as intermediaries of trade, and that's what a money is. A money is just a commodity which is used to facilitate trade because most people will accept it, and they know that other people will accept it. So now there's a competition. Well, what shall be the money?
Okay, unfortunately, we're running into our third break here, so stay with us, and Dr. Block will continue this discussion of just exactly what money is, and then we'll understand what it is to be a counterfeiter. And you'll see the biggest counterfeiter of all is your government. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, folks. Welcome back to the Peter Mack Show on this December 12th. We're discussing Defending the Undefendable with Dr. Block, and he's going to continue his discussion about money, but I just wanted to give you a chance to call in if you wanted to, if you had a question for him or feedback. It's going to take him about 5 minutes to finish, but if you want to call after that, give us a call here, toll free at 866-986-6397. Again, 866-986-6397. We're glad to take your calls. So go ahead, Dr. Block. You were talking about money, and we can't just depend on barter, so we have this thing called money, and you're talking about how it comes into being, basically.
Right. It comes into being by being a commodity that is acceptable by most people. Most people use salt or sugar or something like that. But then the question came, well, what precisely should the money be? There was a competition between different commodities, and gold won the battle. Why gold and not bananas? Well, bananas rot. Why gold and not cement? Well, cement is too heavy, too cumbersome. So gold won out, and gold was the money in most societies and most countries. It was the intermediary. Diamonds wouldn't make good money because if you try to make change and you split a diamond in half, you lose most of its value, whereas gold is not only doesn't lose value, but you can cut it pretty easily. It's not like platinum or tungsten, which is harder. Okay, so we've got gold. Now, from the point of government, what's the problem with gold? From the point of government, there are only three ways that they can raise money. One is by taxes. The problem with that is everyone knows who's doing the taxing. The other is borrowing, and again, everyone knows who's doing the borrowing. But if the government can get its own money, fiat currency, these dollar bills that you see around, and raise it, and then we have inflation, most people don't realize that government is the cause of the inflation, the higher the price rise. They think it's due to greed or capitalism or some such thing. So gold is a very bad thing from the point of view of the government. And FDR in this country in 1932 or 33, I forget, broke the tie between the dollar and gold. It used to be that a dollar was a certain amount of gold, and you could turn in your dollars and get gold. And then Nixon in 1971 broke the tie between gold and money internationally. So now what I claim is that government is a counterfeiter. They're counterfeiting gold. The people's money is gold. The reason gold is good is because it sort of handcuffs government. They can't do deficit finance. They can't do as many wars and as many welfare programs because they're limited to taxing and borrowing. They don't have this third option of just printing it up. So that's government is counterfeiter, and I'm certainly against government for its counterfeiting. But now the question comes, suppose and I don't advocate it because it's against the law, and I certainly don't want to go to jail, but suppose I have this printing press in my basement, and I start turning out $50 bills, and they're really good $50 bills, and no one can tell the difference. What I'm really doing is counterfeiting counterfeit money. I'm not counterfeiting legitimate money. I'm counterfeiting counterfeit money. So my claim in this chapter is that this would be compatible with libertarianism. It's sort of like stealing from a thief. Suppose I see you grabbing an old lady's pocketbook and running away with it, and now what I do is I seize it from you. I'm sort of stealing from a thief, or actually liberating from a thief. And do I have the right to do that? Yes, I do. Because if you want to bring it back to the little old lady from whom you stole it, the first step is I got to get it out of your paws. So I'm justified in grabbing it from you. So I'm making an analogy of liberating from a thief and counterfeiting counterfeit money. Now, this is many of these chapters have been under great criticism from people on the left. They think, it's crazy to legalize drugs or to, get rid of the minimum wage law to have free trade. The counterfeiting chapter is the only one that has had serious libertarian criticism, and there are now a whole bunch of articles, 3 or 4 different articles, criticizing this chapter, and I've got articles responding. So if any of your listeners are interested in that, all they have to do is email me, and I'll send them this entire literature. So this chapter is perhaps the most controversial within the libertarian community. I think none of the other chapters are any libertarians critical of. And that's my 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, let me just, while we're waiting possibly for any calls, what's interesting to me in the whole issue of money, and it's a travesty that it's so poorly understood when it's really as simple as you just described it there in 5 minutes, but it's so poorly understood by Americans. And we hear these, the politicians are going to do another stimulus of how many other billions or trillions and so on, and it's just, the numbers become mind-boggling. In fact, I was telling somebody the other day, how much $1 trillion is. If you stack $100 bills, nice, crisp, clean $100 bills, or any size bills, they stack, I'm told, about 250 to an inch. To be $1 trillion would require more than 600 miles of $100 bills. Just an astounding amount of money. But getting back to real money, gold or whatever society, and I think this is an important point, you said that gold sort of won out, and that's true, but it didn't win out because governments down through history said gold will be the money. It won out because people freely decided to use that as money, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And indeed, when I say that I favor the gold standard, it's really a shorthand for saying I favor whatever the free enterprise system or whatever the people decide money is. So if money tomorrow became silver, that would be fine. So when libertarians say we favor the gold standard, as Ron Paul does, what he really means is he favors whatever the free market or the free choice of individuals determines will be the money.
Right. And so you've heard, no doubt, people say, well, we can return to a gold standard because there's not enough gold. But I think it was Murray Rothbard that said you could run the entire economy of the U.S. on an ounce of gold because you just continually subdivide it, and a gram of gold has greater and greater purchasing power as the wealth of the country increases, right?
Well, I think you're right, but, I think Murray was making that point to be very dramatic. I mean, if there were only 5 pounds of gold in the whole world, probably silver would be a better money because you'd have to get infinitesimally small amounts of gold to trade. And we could have warehouse receipts for it, and it could work, but it's a very extreme case. But in actuality, there's plenty of gold in them Bar Hills, and we've got tons and tons of gold already mined, and we've got a lot of it in teeth and in jewelry. So even if we found no more gold in mines, which is very unlikely, the price of gold would just rise. Look, if the price of gold was $1 million an ounce, that'd be enough to conduct business. And, you just have a small amount of gold and you make change in silver or something, but we could still have a free market money. We don't need government bollocksing up the money supply.
Right. And I think another important issue of the whole concept of money is that whatever commodity society decides to use as gold, which, as you pointed out, traditionally or historically has been gold or silver or a combination of them, it's something that it takes labor to get it out of the ground. I can't just dream it up or it's not going to be leaves growing on a tree. If I happen to have the one maple tree in the whole country and somebody decreed that maple leaves are now going to be our money, well, then I just pick them off my tree and I'm incredibly wealthy. But anybody has to mine that gold out of the ground, and then it has to be weighed or fashioned into some kind of coin so that people know that the unit of gold you're giving me is exactly what you say it is. It's, and so on. All those things are necessary, but you couldn't have money without labor to get the money out of the ground, right?
Well, you could. That's the problem. You see, the system, we don't want to be able to just create money out of the thin air as the Federal Reserve System now does. That's why we have hyperinflation. That's why we had Hitler, because of the German hyperinflation in 1923. That's the problem with Zimbabwe, where people trade trillion-dollar Zimbabwe notes. The problem is precisely that the government can. Bernanke and Greenspan have been creating money out of the thin air, and that's why we've got these bubbles, a housing bubble. That's why we've got these crises. That's why we have business cycles, because government has been interfering with the free economy and creating unemployment and depressions.
Well, right, but that's my point. They wouldn't, but they're using fiat money to do that, and if they had real money, would be something that takes labor to acquire, whether it's dug out of the ground or manufactured in some way, and so real money couldn't be multiplied like fiat money is, right?
Precisely. You're absolutely correct that if we had the gold standard, government would be powerless to create unemployment, to create the business cycle. They wouldn't be able to wage wars as much as they can now because they can finance it with creating money out of the thin air. They wouldn't be able to have the warfare, welfare system. So I think Ron Paul is heroic. He's fighting on a very important pressure point of the economy. Money is a very important part of the economy because it touches, except for barter, every trade, half of it is money.
Right.
Take steel. Steel is important too, but not every trade involves steel. Whereas every trade, again, apart from barter, involves money. So the money supply is like the blood stream of the economy, and he who controls that controls an awful lot. And unfortunately, Obama and Bernanke are now controlling it, not the millions of people who comprise the free market system.
Right, and we just have a few minutes left. You're certainly welcome to stay on, but you just agreed to the first hour, so I won't have you stay any longer than you want. But the thing that's so disgusting about it is, well, I guess we're at the end. Well, anyway, Dr. Brock, thank you very much for coming on the show, and perhaps if you send me your email, I'll forward that to people that want to get a hold of this information about counterfeiting from you.
I certainly will.
Okay, thank you very much, folks. We'll be back here in a few minutes. Stay with us. You're on Liberty News Radio.